Welcome to AuthentiCity FM, episode 36. I am your host, Mike Sable. I'm joined, as always, by my friends and co-hosts, Corey Spiegel and Phil Corrali. And we have a great guest today. So if you've ever wondered how the number 4, potatoes, battleship, Phil Dunphy, Galway hookers, and Ghostbusters all weave into one coherent framework to describe our next guest, stick around. We'll see you on the other side. Well, thank you and welcome back to our podcast listeners. So a little bit of explaining is in order. So if you've ever wondered about the number 4, it's a very common number for a footballer to wear if they're kind of the holding midfielder. Number 4 always reminds me of Pep Guardiola, a classic leader just like our next guest. If you've ever wondered about potatoes, there's this great scene in Lord of the Rings where Samwise Gamgee talks about all of the potatoes that you can have. Samwise Gamgee is one of those characters that is one of those empathic characters in a movie. If you've ever wondered about Battleship makes me think of Aegis destroyers, which makes me think of Sam Seaborn, which makes me think of The West Wing, which makes me think of a chess scene where Sam Seaborn and the president play chess to see the whole board, because the president was smart on that show, just like our next guest. Phil Dunphy is one of these things that of all of the TV dads that are out there, he's a great husband and a great father, just like our next guest. The Galway hooker is a little bit of a stretch. It's this great sailing ship on the western coast of Ireland. It's often clad in black with red sails, and it always makes me envision sort of this seasoned stalwart of the seas, kind of this Irish ruddy complexion, just like our next guest. And then lastly, Ghostbusters, which makes me think of the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, which makes me think of marshmallows, which makes me think of Maine Coon cats, the cuddliest of all of the cats.
Aww.
And with that, I bring you our guest, Scott Neal, an empathic leader, a smart husband, father, Irishman with a ruddy complexion who's also very cuddly. Scott, how did I do?
2 thumbs up. Nice job, Mike. That was a
Well,
stretch.
we
Really
are
good.
we are friends. We are neighbors. I live next door to you in your community. You have had an incredible career as a city manager all across Iowa and the state of Minnesota. So, as is our tradition, Scott, how did you come to arrive on this podcast?
How much time do I have? As much as I need, as much as I can take. I grew up, but my story starts in Iowa. I grew up in Iowa, Independence, Iowa, in fact, where America's fame is in our name. Great tagline for that town. And I went from there I grew up there, went to Iowa State University for my bachelor's of science and economics and a master's in public administration. And it was during my undergrad where I had an epiphany. I had a biblical epiphany about city management, right? I was there to do something else. I took an urban politics class. I learned about the LP Cookingham Pendergast gang conflict in Kansas City, and I was hooked. It was a job. It was a job where you're selected on merit. You got paid. You didn't have to stand for election. It was everything. It was everything I really wanted, right? And so from that moment on, I prepared myself to be a city manager. When I was probably 20 years old when I had this epiphany. And I decided to stay. I got my bachelor's degree, and as I said, my master's. I got my master's degree on May 25th, 1988, and I started as a city manager on June 1st, 1988, in small town of Norris, Tennessee, in a little town in East Tennessee, out by Oak Ridge and Knoxville. And I was there for 2 years. And I was there long enough that my wife and I had 2 kids when we were in graduate school, and we added another kid while we were there. And my oldest kid was about 4, 5 years old at the time. And he came home one day from his daycare talking about mama and papa, and really the kind of spooked us in terms of where am I? You know, is this where I want my kid to grow up? And it wasn't. So we started looking for jobs back in Iowa and in the Midwest where my parents were living and my family was living. And I had the good fortune to kind of cross paths with Tom Vilsack when Tom was the mayor of Mount Pleasant, Iowa. He's a young trial attorney. He was really busy. The town kind of asked him to run for mayor. He said he would, but he needed to have a city administrator to do the dirty work, and so he could continue to work his client list. And that was me. He kind of plucked me out of Tennessee, and I moved back there in 1990. And I worked for Tom for 3 years before he went onward and upward. Worked for another mayor for 3 years, and then got my break to go to Minnesota in 1996 with Jim Bremeyer, helped me get that job. And it was a great move for my family. Northfield is a great place to raise a family. Small college town. Mount Pleasant, Iowa was a college town as well. So I had a little bit of a specialty for about a decade there. I worked in Northfield from 96 to 2002 before I went on to Eden Prairie. But I continued to live in Northfield, so I had a little bit of a commute, but my kids were in school and it was no big deal. As soon as my kids were out of school, it became a big deal. I didn't want to drive 45 miles one way anymore. So we moved to South Minneapolis, 41st in Oakland, over on the east side, southeast side, and continued to work in Eden Prairie. I ran into a bit of an ethics jam there with a former mayor that caused me to move to another community right next door in Edina. And I really was lucky that all that timing came together. And I've been in Edina ever since 2010. So when I try to sum up my career, and I'm doing that more and more now because I'm retiring soon, um, I've been a city manager every day of my life since June 1st, 1988.
Well, that is, it's an incredible story and an incredible journey. And for folks listening to this podcast, Scott, you are a trusted friend and colleague to all city managers in Minnesota. So we appreciate you
Thank
taking
you.
some time here. So you've done small, you've done some pretty big places, you've done some other things. What is, for somebody who's thinking about being a city manager or wants to kind of think of, should I go small? Should I go big? Should I go town and gown? What advice do you give to that young professional?
We talk about this a lot, right? And I've had the chance to work with a lot of young people and getting them into the field. And we talk about there are a kind of there's I'm sure an infinite number of ways to get into this field, but really the two basic ones are to go out to the hinterlands and to a small town and be the boss, and then be the boss of a slightly bigger town and then a slightly bigger town until you get to where you want to be, or to be to go to exurban, suburban, and be the assistant to the assistant to the assistant of something, right? And kind of work your way through a bureaucracy. And there's variations of both of those. But I've had people that have worked for me that have done both ways. And I think you got to be ready if you decide that you want to be the boss and you want to move a couple of times. Doing that with a spouse or kids makes that harder. Doing that across different states makes that harder. So if you can do that, like in the Twin Cities, where we've got 7 counties and 110 cities, and a lot of those are cities that have chief executives. That's a really nice environment to kind of you could work your whole career here and just move a couple of times and may not have to move physically at all.
So I just, first of all, Scott, I love this career that you just walked us through. What a fascinating set of experiences that you have had. I was jotting down notes as you were talking because I love to sometimes think about how the smallness of the city management world is so present when we have these conversations. So I was just in Philadelphia last week for the ICMA Local Government Reimagined Conference. I was having a really great conversation with Matt Schmitz, who is the city manager in Independence, Iowa now. And it's just, as you said, Independence, I'm like, whoa, I was just talking to that guy. This small world that we operate in. And then you said something about Northfield, Minnesota. And I had a shiver run up my
No.
back because Look, I mentioned before we were on camera, I went to Augustana College, a lovely, fine liberal arts school in Rock Island, Illinois, with, I would say, the finest choral program in the Midwestern Lutheran school denomination. And then you said Northfield. And all of a sudden, I'm thinking St. Olaf is in Northfield. And St. Olaf is okay, they're pretty great. They've got a Christmas special that everybody watches every year. So, we may have a few things that we have to talk about from that standpoint. But um, it's, I love how we can interweave our lives. And it's not something obviously that's terribly special to city management, but it certainly is underscored when you're able to talk about just these lived experiences that we share in some way, shape, or form. I do want to talk a little bit about how stepping right into that city administrator role right out of grad school sounds great as the as perhaps some of our students that listen to this regularly may think. Going to that small first community and being the city manager right away. I'm working with somebody in a kind of a mentorship role who has had that similar experience, and it's fascinating, but it's also probably pretty darn enlightening real fast in terms of the things that you perhaps may not have expected or may have thought would be easier. And it's not like you get to look up to somebody else to say, what do we do in this circumstance? You're the person who has to make that call. How did you adapt your first as a newly minted MPA, your first gig? You are the person in the seat, ready to go. What was that experience like?
Well, I had a really fortunate occurrence during my grad years of being able to be a resident manager and an area advisor in Iowa State had a huge married student population, and so they had thousands of married student housing apartments, right? And think of an RA and an HA in that setting. In married student housing, there was a resident manager, and then the equivalent of the hall advisor was the area advisor. So I was responsible for an area of about 1,200 family apartments, some duplexes, some singles, some fourplexes, but they were full of couples with kids, and there were streets, and there was public safety, and there was like a Parks and Rec function and public works. I got to do all the kind of the core disciplines of a city manager right there as a graduate student at Iowa State. And so it was a matter of figuring out how to explain that and translate it to the folks that hired me down there. And one of the things that was interesting in that setting too, in Norris, Tennessee, it was the home of the Tennessee Valley Forestry Division and the Tennessee Valley Authority Forestry Division and the Tennessee Valley Authority um, the dam management division, right? Where they manage the electrical output of all the different dams in their system. So what that meant is you had this population that lived in this little town, and they were from all over. They were mostly from Pennsylvania and Minnesota and New York and Wisconsin. So the idea that a guy from the Midwest wanted to be their city manager, they were super excited about that somebody would drive, especially in my case where I had a wife and two kids. We show up and we're a little family, and every small town wants to attract and keep every little family they can get their hands on, right? And so I think that hasn't changed, and that was certainly something I experienced when I was there.
So, Scott, I have to say, your origin story is probably one of the more unique ones I've ever heard. Because almost every guest, and I would say the vast majority of people in my professional network, stumbled their way into government. It wasn't the thing. Even with a whole bunch of MPAs, there was some trigger and often some person. And the people that went straight to government usually had someone much like Phil in their family that was a public servant. So you talked kind of briefly about it in your intro, but how did you find public service? And then let's pull that string forward. I suspect over this illustrious career, you've had the opportunity to mentor a wide variety of people. So what advice are you giving now that may have evolved?
So the first part of your question, Corey, was did I have anybody in my life that was in public service? Is that?
Yeah, essentially, because most of us stumble into it, right? Like I started my career
Yeah.
in the private sector and I met these economic developers. I had never heard of an economic developer before I met these people. And then I'm like, oh my God, I want to do what you do, right? And so everybody's got a story like that. Were you
I
just
didn't,
lucky in college?
uh, I didn't have a person like that in my life, which is, it's interesting in that, sometimes the kids of a drunk father become drunks themselves, right? Because that's what they're experiencing, or they might go completely the other direction and swear that off because of the experience they had. I didn't have that kind of experience. I didn't have a mentor or I really, it came to, as I said, I know it sounds trite, but it was an epiphany for me that there was this job out there that was right on the border of politics and management. And it was just something that just clicked in me. That was me. That's what I wanted to be. And, you know, 45 years later, that's who I am. And I think I've talked to people I've mentored a lot during this time frame about that epiphany. Not everybody has it, but some people do. Um, and I talked to one of my former management fellows just earlier this afternoon who finished up her 2-year management fellowship with us and is a city manager now in Morris, Minnesota, a town of about 5,000 people way out in western Minnesota. And I think she's not a person that's going to work her way back to the metro in Minnesota. I think she's going to want to stay out there because that's where she's from.
So Corey led into the question, and so I'm going to follow up with it because I happen to know the answer. So it's funny because you didn't have a mentor getting into the profession, but you have developed a well-earned reputation of being a mentor. And so why did you decide to start this uh, tree of followers? Like we often talk about Bill Walsh in the NFL sort of created this coaching tree, and you can follow the lineage back to this person and this person, and there's sort of this thing. You have that reputation in Minnesota. Talk to us about where this idea came from, and maybe give us a glimpse as to how many people are part of this sort of lineage.
Yeah. Uh, It came from a couple of places. One, I can't remember what year it was. It was like '08 or '09 or 10, something like that. I went to the ICMA conference that year. I was a regular there. And I went to see one of the keynoters speak about the gender imbalance among city managers, right? And we've got to do something about that. It's important. And she convinced me that this is important and we need to do something about it. So I stayed and waited and talked to her after she was done and said, what are you doing? What are you doing for this? And she said, I'll never forget. She said, I'm raising awareness. Like that's, that's not, that doesn't do it, right? Raising the awareness just means to me, it just means we're complaining about something. And that's not what I wanted to be. But I came upon Mike the scene you did a show a few weeks or months ago where you talked about Booker Hodges, right? And you told that story about you or somebody asked Booker, how do you get more African American cops? And what did he say? You go hire them, right? That's how you get more. I looked at that the same I looked at this issue in a similar way of how do we increase the number of female candidates for city manager jobs? We got to make them. We got to go out and be intentional about finding good people, putting them in good positions, teaching them, mentoring them, and by doing that, they will rise and they will be in that cohort of people that are going to be the leaders at least in our metro area for many years to come. So that's where it came from for me. It was wanting to fix a historic wrong, and also preserve that we all do better in our field when people that deserve to rise.
Well, I'm going to say three things. Number one, thanks for being a listener of the podcast. There are some nuggets in there that are actually pretty useful. So thanks for being a listener. And it has proven out. I mean, one of the most recent hires in Minnesota is one of your original fellows, I think, in your program. And so there's proven success. So kudos to you. I'm going to turn it over to Phil because I see he's got a burning question.
Yeah, Mike, you're so kind on that. Well, Scott, I want to talk though. It's not so much a question. I want to kind of continue the conversation of what you just were talking about from the standpoint of the talking versus the doing. And, this is the profession has been struggling for as long as I've been in the profession to do the doing of getting people into it, right? And so, ICMA over the years has come up with taglines, and state associations talk about how, the pipeline is just not as strong as it needs to be, and MPA programs are seeing fewer and fewer candidates who are finding their way there, and yet we know that we're still finding amazing people to push into these roles. And I guess I look at it from the standpoint of I appreciate how you have taken action and have taken steps yourself as a manager to say, look, I can't wait for somebody else to do it. My job is not just to serve my community, but to serve my profession and to grow my profession, so that when I someday retire, there's not just one or two people, there's a whole room full of people who can take over for me. And I guess I'm curious about how you talk about that in Minnesota or in your own community in a way that helps people to kind of say, oh, it's not just Scott's job, it's actually my job too. I have to do that as well.
I see other people doing it now that weren't doing it 5 years ago. And they talk to me about how our program works, and I'll talk to anybody about that. But I do see some of that happening, so I'm happy about that. In our case, we have been able to put our I shouldn't, how do I want to say this? The people that have come out of our program have earned their new jobs, right? And there's city managers in White Bear Lake and New Brighton, and the assistant in Edina. One of my own assistant was my management fellow in 2012. She's the only one of the people I've had as a management fellow that we've hired, right? The deal that we make with these folks is you can work for us for 24 months and then you're out of there. You got to go somewhere else, and you got to provide, and hopefully you got to pay it forward doing this somewhere else, right? And so now I'm seeing some of those first people that were in their kind of mid-20s are now in their mid or late 30s, and they're capable now of paying it forward because they're in positions where they can do that. And that's really gratifying to me.
Well, and I love your point a moment ago about raising awareness is great, right? It's part of a component of the work, but it isn't the work. The work is creating spaces for people to grow, creating the opportunities for people to say, this is something I want to do, and there's a person who wants to help me do it. And I posted something yesterday on LinkedIn, and it's sometimes you just need a person to tell you that you can do it, to be the thing that pushes you to actually do it. And so I just want to underscore that I'm grateful that you've taken it not as a burden or as kind of I guess this is something I should do, but actually something that seems to really define who you are as a leader, as a manager, and that you are modeling good behavior for your colleagues and encouraging that to be not just something that you do in Edina, but that they should also do. And these days, I feel like we're fighting a bit of an uphill battle to convince people that it's actually work worth doing. Yet we see in a lot of our Gen Z hires this real vigor and passion for the service, and the opportunity to help make the world a better place. And local government is the place to do that. There's the opportunities are so broad and vast, and so maintaining that excitement is so important. And I just want to underscore my gratitude to you for keeping that flame going, because a lot of managers right now are struggling to do that.
So I want to tug at, you use the phrase 45 years, which is amazing. And then I want to connect that to something Phil just said. So having been in the city manager's chair proper for that entire arc is amazing. And because you've been able to influence the next generations of this workforce, how have you seen it evolve? I'm curious, that is an incredible arc of how local government has evolved. We've talked about disruption a lot on the podcast. We've talked about the workforce changes. And we're at this inflection point, I think, politically, culturally, in all the ways. And so as you get to reflect back on this amazing kind of journey, how have you seen talent and service evolve over that arc?
Gosh, that's a great question. Some of the things that I was in the workforce when we introduced computers, right, into our office place. Didn't have them before, and I was there when we bought them and installed them in both Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and in Norris, Tennessee. So from a tech standpoint, I've seen that revolution. Um, I have seen the I was going through some stuff as I'm preparing my retirement, and I found a letter that I wrote to, I don't know, I think it was George Bush or something, as the city manager of Norris, Tennessee. And we can't afford all of the building improvements we're going to have to make with this Americans with Disabilities Act thing, right? Because I was in this job when that was just a thought in somebody's head, and moving it forward. And so that has been an that still runs my life in many ways to today. The people that I'm involved in, I think people unfortunately are meaner than they were at the beginning of my career. I would say that. They're more plugged in. I've got a group of people in my town that are haters, right? That direct that hate towards me. I'm sure that after this is published, some Google alert is going off that Scott Neal's name was used, and they're going to listen to this, and they're going to come back to a council meeting and tell the council I said this and this and this on this podcast. I just know that's going to happen. And that didn't happen 25 years ago. That's relatively new. Um, Let's see. Decker Plain is still the city manager in Bettendorf. He was the city manager when I went to Tennessee. um, that's kind of funny. Not everything changes, right? Um, I think those are just some wide ranges for me. I think one of the things I have noticed among the students, because I do when we do our recruitment effort, we usually go to a university or two and ask students who are interested in our fellowship. I would say 20 years ago, I could ask them, do you want to be a city manager? And they would say, yeah, why do you think I'm here? Right? They would say something like that. Today, when I do that, they say, well, maybe, I kind of want to manage a nonprofit, or I kind of like this or that. And I'm always shocked by the idea that they show up for an interview with the city manager has got something called the Edina City Management Fellowship, and they're sort of lukewarm about the whole topic, right? That's something that's relatively new for me too.
So Scott, this might be an unfair question, but it's kind of related to what Corey just asked you. As you look at a career of the magnitude of yours and start to think about kind of what the next step is, I'm curious what you are sad is still the same, despite 45 years of of progress, right? Like what hasn't changed that really should have by now?
Insularity in a police department. The idea that this major thing that we do, and the people that do it want to be separate from the rest of the people that are their coworkers. That's I've tried to crack that nut for as long as I've been in my career, and I just can't do it. I don't know. I don't know how to do it. I can't find a good example of somebody that's done it on a long-term basis. That's not to say that they're not respectful and et cetera, et cetera. All of that is true. We've got a great police department. I got a great police chief, but there still is this insularity piece is difficult, and I think that's gotten more intense as with body cameras and the other kind of pushback that law enforcement gets these days. That's one that really strikes me.
Well, I'm going to have to say that feels like a future episode that we're going to have to tackle, because I think every city manager across the country would say that exact same thing. I see a bunch of head nods.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we do on the podcast, which people should like and subscribe and do all the things that they do on podcasts, but we always know that our guests are humans outside of the job that you have, right? So there's probably things that you do at home or with family. So what do you do outside of the workforce that brings you joy that you want to share with us?
I have my wife and my wife and I have been married for 43 years. And our kids are grown, right? All right, my kids are 40, 38, and 36. And my oldest kid lives in Vienna, Austria. My middle kid lives in Shanghai. And my youngest kid lives in South Minneapolis, where he will live forever so he can clean my gutters when I need him to do that. Um, so I tell you that because a lot of we do a fair amount of travel, and we're going to see them. We're going to Vienna to see them. We have two grandkids in Vienna: a 10-year-old girl, Rosie, and a 3-year-old boy named Fred Neal. Right. And my kids that live in Shanghai don't have any children, and then I have a grandchild that lives in South Minneapolis, and her name is Lou. Beverly Louise is her name, actually. And so we spend time with them. We do the big Neal family vacation together, and we love doing that. So travel is important to us. Uh, my 3 boys and I are all soccer fans, and the Arsenal is our club, and they won the English Premier League yesterday, and was so excited. They haven't won it in 23 years, so we're just over the moon about that. Uh, I like Scotch whiskey lot. I took a trip to Scotland and did a distillery tour on Islay a couple of years ago with a friend. It was the trip of a lifetime in a lot of ways. And so that's right. We have a cabin in northwestern Wisconsin, and about 90 miles from the Twin Cities, so very accessible. And we spend a lot of time there. And that's it, Mike. I don't do anything else
That
fun.
seems like quite of a lot of things to accomplish. So I do have to, I just going to divert a little bit for the podcast. So Scotch whiskey is there's a big family there. What's your go-to? What advice do you have for somebody who's trying to get into the Scotch game? Maybe dabble, like give us a little bit of advice.
A 16-year-old Lagavulin is a good place to start. It's got some peat to it, but not too much. If you like peat, if you like a Scotch whiskey that's got dirt in it, and you can taste the dirt and the smoke in it, my favorite is Ardbeg, and I like a variety called Drum. It's a cask that is a rum that the Scotch is aged in a rum barrel, and so it has this sort of sweet, smoky, peaty taste to it. It's just delicious. Those are my 2 easy go-tos. You can buy those in the United States.
Perfect. I appreciate that. As I dabble, I'm not an expert. I have not traveled, but that's I can start to make a list.
It's good stuff.
I just want to point out there are now 2 West Wing references in this particular podcast, and it's making me very joyful. Mike early on, and then a Lagavulin, it's got a starring role in at least 2 episodes that I can think of. So that's very exciting.
The best
for me.
It's good stuff.
So, as a native cheesehead, I must know the town where the cabin is. And then we're going to talk about old fashions after that.
I thought you were from Iowa, Corey. You're
I
from
live in
Wisconsin?
Iowa. I am from
Aha.
Wisconsin.
Our place is midway between Balsam Lake and Turtle Lake and Amory. So if you think about that part, Polk County,
Mhm.
I think it's the poorest county in Wisconsin. That's where we have our place. It's on a lake. We have a house on a lake, right? So that's great.
Yes, there are lakes in Wisconsin too. All right. So not as many, some
Not-
larger ones though.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I grew up
The lower
off highway.
standard, as I understand it, in Wisconsin, there's a lower standard for what constitutes a lake. That's how I've understood it.
Well, I mean, on our property, we have my grandfather dug a pond. It's a spring-fed pond. So as a kid, it was our personal lake.
There you go.
So you talked about Scotch. Mike and I like to banter off screen every once in a while about old fashions. And since you
Mhm.
have a cabin in Wisconsin,
Yeah.
there are two types, in my experience, of supper club old fashions. There
Yeah.
is the whiskey old fashioned sour and the brandy old fashioned
Brandy.
sweet.
You gotta go with brandy and sweet, I think.
So then you accept that sometimes soda can go into a mixed drink that's
I
made
do.
with whiskey or brandy.
I do, but
Excellent.
it better not be a good Scotch whiskey because that's travesty.
Sometimes is the very operative word there. Sometimes, right?
Yeah. I love to share my whiskey, but if you're gonna put anything in it other than a dab of water or a piece of ice, you can't have it. You can't, because you're not appreciating it then fully. But I do appreciate a good
thank you
old
for that. I wanted someone else who really understands the Northwoods of Wisconsin to explain that.
I just
Supper
have this
clubs have- yeah.
weird feeling of anxiety riddling through my body right now. So I'm going to transition. It's going to be fine, right?
All right.
The world, everybody has their thing, and Wisconsin has a lot of things. And
We got a lot of things.
my love of teasing Illinois is just going to be trumped a little bit by teasing Wisconsin today. So I'm going to pivot.
yeah.
Thank you. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
that.
You're welcome. That's all for you. Scott, one of the bits that we do on our podcast is we let you ask questions of us. Is there anything that you want to tackle? Oh, I heard paper rustling.
God, he
so that
took
must mean
notes.
something good.
He's prepared. That's frightening.
How many questions do I get? It's usually just one, right?
You know what? It's your show. We'll give you as many
It's
as you
my
want.
show.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
just
boy.
your show.
What's a conspiracy theory that you think could actually be true?
I think Area 51 may contain some spacecraft that does not originate from the planet Earth. And I accept that that's a thing that, like, there's enough chatter and enough flashing lights and weird airplane cameras. And I'm like, it's plausible, because you got to remember, I grew up thinking the X-Files was absolutely real. And so that was like a formative experience in my teen years. And so I think Area 51 may hold something that we are not aware of fully.
So I was expecting this to be a work-related question. So I'm not fully prepared, but I'm going to say something that's a little controversial, and I just want to point out for the record that I don't mean it in any way to undermine the structures of government that we are very grateful exist and are doing everything we can to hold together. But the movie JFK had a very profound impact on my perspective of the Kennedy assassination, and it's something that I believe there is more to the story. I don't know that the JFK movie storyline is really the conspiracy theory that I subscribe to, but I could see there being some pieces and parts that warrant some additional review. Mm-hmm.
So I'll kind of bridge those two. And with the trickle of a certain set of files recently, I think there is a ruling class that is now enmeshed between business and politics. Not that it probably always wasn't, quite frankly. But I think we and I'll use the royal we across many, many cultures and civilizations, have very little control over what actually happens.
Okay, I have to tell you, I am so excited for whatever you're going to ask next. I am just, you can ask as many questions because we did not prepare for any of
Nope.
that, and I'm so
Nope, not
happy.
at all.
I'm
Yeah.
so delighted. Just keep them coming.
What is a failure that happened in your job, that you failed not intentionally, but what happened and what did you learn from it?
So I usually do this bit where I call on somebody else to answer the question.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, I have told this story before. I worked for the city of Brooklyn Park, and it's a kind of a northern suburb in the Twin Cities region. And this was probably at the same time you had your conference session about supporting women in the workplace. And so we were going to be the ones that were going to be the first to offer a paid parental leave program. And I want to say back in like 2011, like time frame. And I mean, it was like leading edge stuff. And we put together a committee and we just policies and we did all this stuff. And we brought it to the all-male city council, who looked at us like we were crazy and said, there's no way we're doing any of this. And it was a colossal failure in the council chambers, like on camera, just a total collapse. And we walked back into the room and we looked at each other and we kind of scratched our head and we said, well, that was a mistake. And then we said, and it was like one of those things. I mean, it was an on-camera just failure. It was embarrassing, and we kind of got, walked out of the room. And we said, okay, well, let's not do that again, but let's still do this thing. And then we started to like rethink, like, how do we need to sell this? How do we need to reframe it? How do we need to repitch it? And it was 6 months of, I liken it to like crawling through broken glass of just these meetings and these compromises and these things. And it was like, we got to the end of it and they were like, well, we'll allow it in this very small, tailored way. And it was like, okay, let's just take that win. And we literally put forward we were one of the first cities in the region to put forward this proposal. And it taught me number one, don't get ahead of your council. Which is an important lesson for every young professional. They are the policymakers for a reason. What they believe and how they think matters. So learn what that is. And then take the win that you can get. You are never going to get everything that you want. But this slow, methodical sort of movement towards progress. And now, right, the state of Minnesota, some 15 years later, now has a fully funded paid parental leave program.
Yeah.
And so it was in the moment a very embarrassing council meeting to have to stand up there, get defeated, go back into your office the next day and think, oh, that was awful. So there's a lot of lessons there, but that is one that sort of seared in my memory as an important thing to do and a huge, huge failure.
So, as I mentioned, I came out of economic development. That was my lane into local government. And great economic developers have these partnerships and friendships that span the whole organization because that's how the magic in economic development happens. And so when I left the economic development chair to move into city management, I never made the switch that I can't have friends at work. And you called your resident group one thing. I referred to them lovingly as my fan club. And 30 months later, they still post about me on social media. It's crazy. It's not reciprocal at all. But they weaponized that. I mean, there were pictures and it was internally weaponized and externally weaponized. And so the idea, and this is what made it hard, my relator and individualization are in my top 5 in Gallup. Like, relationships really, really, really matter to me. And it got so visceral and weaponized. And all of a sudden I'm like, so I can't have friends in this job. And nobody ever told you that. And as the first woman in the job who broke the glass, nobody tells you that until it's way too late. And so that is my lesson was I didn't have, because I'd switched lanes, I didn't have like the city manager network to lean into when all of that happened. And so that was like a really hard lesson to learn, really valuable one, but a really hard one.
So, these are both really good stories and both really good lessons for anybody who's thinking about a public service career. But mine may be I'm going to take it a little different direction. Mine is was my biggest interview mess up ever. And the moral of the story, I'll give that out early. The moral of the story is always prepare yourself for the question that you don't expect but should. My first job, my first real job out of grad school, I was working for the village of Deerfield, Illinois. The manager had been there for 27 years and pulled me aside one day and said, "Hey, I'm going to announce my retirement soon. And I really think you should think about applying for the job when they open it up." And I was like, I am 27 years old. I am not ready for the job that you do. And he's like, "Oh, sure you are. I was 27 years old when I got my first manager job. You're fine." So I took that as you're fine. You don't have to overly prepare for, if you think that you want to try to do this, people are going to think like he did that you are ready for it. So let's fast forward to the interview. The mayor at the time decided that he didn't want to hold the interviews at Village Hall. He wanted to hold them at the Hyatt Hotel in town. And the Hyatt, which normally has a lovely boardroom available, the boardroom had been booked, so they put everybody into a suite on the 7th floor, which was weird by itself. We got off the elevator. The recruiter took us down. You sat in a chair outside of a regular hotel room door, waiting to be brought in, and you sat down then at what was essentially a dining room table in a large suite. And at this table was the mayor at the other end of the head of the table, who I had a really good relationship with and I felt really positive about. And I was glad I could make good eye contact with him. And then there were 2 of the trustees and then 4 members of the community who I only knew 3 of. The 4th was a bit of an enigma to me. I had seen him before. He had presented to the village board on behalf of a developer. It was an attorney. 27-year-old Phil marches into the room, and I'm excited. This is going to go great. I can't wait. The mayor's right there. He likes me. He thinks I'm a good guy. And I sit down, and I turn to my right, and that's where this resident who I kind of knew of but didn't know was sitting. And it just so happened he had the first question. And the first question was, and I'll never forget it, you are 27 years old. You graduated from college 5 years ago. I have shoes that are as old as you are. And I just am curious why on earth you think you could do this job.
Can I just say the amount of twinges I had for HR law violations by a lawyer? Just
fair point. But I had no answer for that question. I had not even contemplated that somebody was going to say, "We're not sure that you're actually prepared to do this work." Now, in retrospect, what I should have said was, guess what? I've actually had to do this job for about 6 months of the 2.5 years that I've been here. When I walked in the door on my first day, the village manager had emergency eye surgery. He wasn't going to be able to do any work for 8 weeks. He had to lay, frankly, stationary for 23 hours a day. Couldn't look at anything, couldn't talk to anyone, couldn't do anything. And I didn't know where the bathroom was, but I had a council meeting that was coming up that following Monday, and I had to get a packet out, and I did it. And I did that 6 or 7 times during the first 6 to 8 months of my job as a 24-year-old. I'm 27 right now. I can handle it no problem. 46-year-old Phil knows how to answer that question. 27-year-old Phil was like, I think that I could do a really good job because I like the community. The, the moral of
Love
the
it.
story is just make sure that you are prepared for that unexpected question, even if you don't think anyone's ever going to challenge whatever it is that they might challenge. Have an answer for that. And I tell you what, every interview I've ever had since that time, I have racked my brain about what sort of weird ass question could somebody ask me, and how will I make sure that I have an answer that makes sense?
Brilliant
Well,
answer to that question.
those were some pretty number one, fun and pretty hard questions to answer. So I'm going to flip the tables on you, Scott, and ask
Oh,
a hard
no.
question if you're willing.
All right.
So early on in your introduction, you talked about an ethics issue with a mayor, and you're talking to 2 former ICMA board members and a soon-to-be ICMA board member, and you've had some experience with that with the ICMA process. If you're comfortable, if you're willing to
Yeah.
share, can you tell that story for our listeners?
Yeah, I guess that's where this question came from, right? Is my own experience with a personal failure. I had a personal failure while I was working in Eden Prairie and I was living in Northfield. The mayor of Northfield was a friend of mine. I never served with him, but after I left, he got elected, and he kind of took his approach to being the mayor as I was going to be his kind of shadow assistant, and I didn't want to do that. Um, but at some point, he asked me a question. I gave him an answer just to get him off my back, and it was a subject matter and a response that I should have given my colleague in Northfield a heads up, and I didn't do that. Not for any reason other than I just forgot or got busy or just didn't do it. Well, for me, it eventually turned into an ICMA ethics case, and I got publicly censured for that in 2006, I believe. And it was a terrible experience, right? To have ICMA come to Eden Prairie and buy like a 6 by 8 inch ad in the Eden Prairie News to say, you know, Scott Neal is your city manager, and did you know he did this and this and this, and and we're publicly censoring him for that. It was a terrible experience, and it was one that, in many ways, changed my life because um, none of my after this came out, none of my colleagues called me and to offer me any kind of solace or keep in there and any of that. Nobody did. And the reason nobody did, my mom would tell me later, is that if you want a friend, you got to be a friend. And I just didn't put any time into keeping building and keeping a network and learning who my friends were and who my neighbors were and spending time with them. I didn't do any of that. So there wasn't anybody out there to call me and give me support. So that's what I learned from that. Is from that moment on, I thought I got to do this differently. I'm going to be a city manager for 20, God willing, 25 more years. And I need to be better about that. So was my motivation for becoming a better supportive neighbor and friend and networker. And yeah, it was really a horrible situation, but it's also one where I got through it. And so I haven't always been on the best of terms with our friends at ICMA.
Well, so I will freely admit, so I have never heard that story because I
You
came
don't
in.
have to apologize,
No,
Mike.
no, but I mean,
No.
I came into the profession. I came to Minnesota in like 2009, and so like for me, that was ancient history, number one. And I have only known you as the person that convenes groups that if there's ever some sort of like regional thing, like you're going to be in it. And I know your mayor is one of those people you're always sort of if you ever want to create a conspiracy group or some group that's going to conspire to do this thing, like you and the mayor are going to be part of it in the best way. You're going to be conveners and hosts. And so, we call our podcast Authenticity FM for a reason. We love when people tell stories. So number one, I appreciate you sharing kind of authentically,
Mhm.
kind of your experience. And right, I've talked, kind of obliquely about my own frustrations with what ICMA does and doesn't do. And so thanks for taking the courage to sort of tell that story. Um, I I don't know it. That's not how I experienced you, but I'm really grateful that you were willing to kind of talk about it.
Yeah, yeah. The story that you were talking about though was in the end of my time frame in Eden Prairie. I had a situation where with my mayor there where just by accident we uncovered the fact that he was billing the city for trips that he wasn't really going on, and getting mileage for things that he never drove to, and it's kind of petty corruption, right? So I went to my city attorney and said, I found this, I verified it, it's true. I'm just going to go to the mayor and say, knock it off, quit doing this, right? But in Minnesota, we don't have that option. There's a provision in state statute that says if you are a local government employee and you uncover election, or excuse me, from corruption in an elected official, you shall notify the state auditor, and then there's a whole process that goes from there. So I had to do that, and I thought all the way through, this is a risk for me politically, but I'm a whistleblower, right? And there's whistleblower protections and all of that. Well, as the process went forward, politically, he paid a high price for that. But what happened at the end was the county attorney did a plea agreement with him that turned it all down to like a disorderly conduct or something like that. So at that moment, I'm no longer a whistleblower. I'm just a guy that ratted out the mayor, right? Because there's a definition of that in there. So I didn't have those protections like whistleblowers would have, and uh, that was frightening because I didn't know what to do at that point. Fortunately for me, the Edina city manager at the time, Gordon Hughes, who was an Eden Prairie resident living in the town that I worked in, called me up and said, "Hey, it looks like you're in some trouble. Maybe you need a new job, and mine's going to be open this starting next week. Do you want to give it a run?" And I did, and here I am. So that was the story of how I moved from one city to just one town over.
So, Scott, thanks for telling the ethics violation story. I think it's important for people to understand what it means when those things happen, and that we as managers are imperfect, and sometimes we make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes are hard, and sometimes those mistakes come with consequences. And all the time, those mistakes have the opportunity to bring us the chance to do something differently. And of all of the pieces of that story that I derive the most value from, it's that you said, I didn't take the steps to be a colleague. I didn't take the steps to build a network. I didn't take the steps to be a person who extended their hand to a neighbor. And then I realized that if I don't do that, they won't do it for me. And I think in this profession, it's an awfully lonely place on the best of days. And on the worst of days, it can be the loneliest of places. And so, taking that opportunity where some people might just be frustrated, and, they're going to take their ball, and they're going to, if they stay in the profession, they're just going to be by themselves with their arms crossed in front of them, and grit it out until they finally retire, and that's that. And the stories you have told through the entirety of this conversation are the antithesis of that. The stories you have told are about building the profession, are about growing young professionals, about giving them the chance to become you somewhere else, about sharing your experiences so that they understand what it's like to be a manager and how um, they too have the ability to do it. And so I just want to, give you a little bit of applause for picking up the pieces and not throwing them at the wall, but rather placing them gently back on your desk and reassembling whatever the thing was, and saying, you know what, this doesn't define me. What defines me is how I grow this profession that I care so deeply about. And I just, we don't have these conversations very often in public because they're hard.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for sharing it in the way that you did. I will tell you, I don't know that I've ever had a conversation with anyone who's ever been censured, because usually they just never want to talk about it. Please, let's just erase it from our memories and just walk away from it and hope that no one ever brings it up again. And here you are bringing it up yourself. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, thanks.
So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and come off of the hard lessons and go to the fun ones. As you reflect back, what are a couple of the things you are most proud of?
You may see this, Corey, in the economic development world. If you ask that question to a bunch of economic developers, they talk about every deal they made, right?
I've got a really long list. It's great.
The TIF deal, and had this many new jobs, and they built this many square feet of warehouse, and all of that. I've done some of that too, and I built pools and ice arenas and lots of buildings and fire stations and so forth. But for me, the thing that I'm most proud of is the people that I have worked with, both from the staff team, the executive leadership team basis, but everybody that I've worked for. Um, and more particularly, the people that have been through my internship program in Eden Prairie and my fellowship program in Edina. That's the best way that I look at, is when I'm thinking about what's my legacy. What do I want my legacy to be? That's what I want my legacy to be. We don't always get to pick what our legacy is, right? I get that, but I've helped to produce people that are managing cities in the Twin Cities now, and I'm really proud of that. And they're doing great work. I think for our part of the deal is we hire A students, and then, hey, guess what? They turn out to be successful people. So that's not terribly innovative, but that's what we've done in our program here.
So I will offer that you just undersold your value to the profession, because right, I work in a neighboring city in the East Metro. We are creating our first intern program. I'm loosely basing it off of the stuff that you did. So like there are copycats that are out there, and I have the benefit of knowing that you don't only just run one of the premier cities in the region, but you also facilitate a number of peer management peer groups. And so talk to me what that looks like kind of day to day for you, and then maybe what might be next for you as you think about retirement.
Yeah, joined a peer group, a city manager peer group led by Craig Rapp, and the Compass peer group back in, like, when he started it in the Twin Cities. So it's like 2012 or 2011, something like that. And I've been involved in that ever since. A couple of years ago, uh, as I was thinking about what I was going to do in retirement, I had that discussion with Craig, and he asked me if I was interested in facilitating groups, and I said I am. So he gave me the opportunity to facilitate two different groups. We meet on a monthly basis for 3 hours apiece. One group is all city managers. The other group is all assistant city managers. So it's a little different spin in each room. But yeah, I'm doing that now, and I've been doing that for the past couple of years, and intend to do a lot more of that in the future, starting in January of 27.
Well, as a former participant and a current facilitator, I could tell you that I appreciate kind of you stepping in and kind of taking that leadership role, because it does, there's a benefit. And Corey talked about kind of the loneliness, right? It is weird to be like, oh, I can't just ask the people around me what to do. I have to actually have people who like actually know the job and do the job. And so there's real value in that kind of camaraderie and spirit of like, okay,
Yeah.
we're sort of this little group, we're all in it together. Let's figure it out together. It's kind of fun.
And I have one of the assistant city manager group. You have one too, right, Mike? That I I love this group so much because one person comes with a problem, um, and then everybody around the table sort of, here's what I would do. Have you thought about this? And they're all trying to work on this problem solving thing, right? And I'm just there to sort of keep the greased wheels going forward. Somebody at some point will turn to me and say, "Well, God, Scott, you must have ran into this problem 100 times. How did you solve it?" And that's okay, but that's not their first move. That's their last move, right? And so I'm glad that we have that kind of relationship where they just don't all turn to me and say, fix our problem for us. They're like all city managers, they're problem fixers, and they're going to try to do everything they can to fix their own problem before they turn to an old person to fix it for them.
It is a humbling experience to be the old person in a room. It just is.
Yeah.
Right, man. It's one of those things. You get enough gray hair. It's like you look around and you're like, oh God, I'm it. This is awful.
That's something I think as I think about my career, I've experienced that, right? When I started my job as a 25-year-old city manager, I was managing people that were the same age as my parents. And now I manage people that are younger than my kids. And so I've been through that whole age range in this time frame from 1988 till today.
Well, one of the things we talk about always is that we are inspired by our young professionals. They are just the most fun to kind of be around and get inspired by. Phil, I can see it in your eyes. What do you got?
Well, I was just gonna say, I think from the standpoint of Scott, what you were just talking about, you know, um, the age differences that we are working through right now. And by the way, Mike, you have no gray hair, so stop talking about it like you do. We all know you look younger today than you did 20 years ago, which is really disappointing for those of us who are stunningly older today than we were 20 years ago. But um, you know, the thank you guys, for both of you, for taking these leadership roles and helping people work through what is a complicated transition, a complicated set of circumstances. There are a lot of assistants out there who are amazing assistants who say, this is the job I want to keep doing. I don't ever want to step up into that big chair because it's just not what I want for myself. One of my a person that I would call one of my most significant mentors here in Illinois is a career assistant. And she has told me over and over again, that's not what I want to do. This is what I want to do. And supporting that role, which is such an important role in an organization, to support the manager and to support the leadership team, is as important as anything. And I think sometimes is the forgotten role, from the standpoint, you know, a lot as managers, we're lonely and we talk about that all the time, but it's also lonely to be the second chair. You're frequently the person who people are coming to and lamenting why the manager didn't do X or why isn't the manager doing Y. And I told the manager to do Z and they still didn't do it. And why can't they do it? And why aren't you getting them to do it on my behalf? It's a tough job. And, you know, we've all done it. We've all been in that space, except for Scott. But it's a role that is so critical to success in our organizations. And so supporting it and helping people to have the resources so that it's not also draining, because the work is draining today. And, you know, Scott, your point maybe an hour or so ago in this conversation about how people are meaner today than they used to be. People are more comfortable being unkind. I don't see that abating anytime soon.
I don't
And
either.
how we steel ourselves up against that is a challenge. And at the same time, even as we're talking tonight, I got a text message from one of my department heads. We have a complicated board meeting tomorrow night, and they said, it's been a really hard lead up to this meeting, and I really want to give everybody a chance. Is it okay if I send out a note to the leadership team and say, hey, after the meeting tomorrow, could we all just like go and grab a Diet Coke and debrief together and just kind of be together? And I said, yes, thank you so much for taking that initiative and saying, I can sense this too, right? The work is hard and it's thankless. And sometimes we have to thank ourselves for the work because nobody else is going to do it. So um, it's a unique and amazingly rewarding career that takes a lot from you. But you know, as you look at retirement, what's the next step for you? What do you want to do next? What's your grown up job going to be?
Yeah, my grown up job. I do have some plans that we're not quite ready to announce yet. But will involve some peer group consulting work that I hope to do. I'm going to do more of in the future, and then sort of the puttering consulting kind of job, right? That I hang out with old people, and somebody calls me and asks me to help them, and I say, how much can you pay me? And we make a deal and we do the job. I think it'll go like that.
We have and Mike has been very fond of the word ritual lately, which I love. So
Hmm.
our closing ritual is to give you the last word. But before we get there, what is one thing that leaves you optimistic or hopeful? Pick either one for the future of the profession, local government, wherever you want to take this little question. What gives you that little glimmer of hope?
The 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 fact that most of the 20 and 30 somethings that I work with are not cynical, are not cynical. They believe that government can work. They want to be there to help it work. They believe that the more people they get involved in a process, the better. Um, Things that over my time frame have not always proved themselves to be true. I wish they were true, but they haven't always been true. But I think the folks that I'm working with now, especially in that age range, that gives me optimism.
As is customary, one, thank you so much for spending your evening with us. And two, you have the honor and privilege of the final words.
Wow, the final words. I'm glad you all do this kind of work. Um, is it fair to call it work? Uh, I'm glad that you do this and that you provide an opportunity for people like me and others to come and talk about their lives and what they are doing career wise. I think that's important. I'm hoping that people will listen to this and be inspired to do some of the same things I've been inspired to do too. So thank you.
Well, it is our absolute joy to have you. You have had an incredible career in Minnesota and in Iowa and in Tennessee, and as I said early on, right, we are friends and colleagues, and so I'm just grateful to give you a chance to talk about it because you've been so great to so many of us, and so just a little bit of like honoring of the work that you've been able to do for the rest of us is our pleasure to do. We do this out of love for the profession and for this work. And so, Scott, thank you so much, and we will see
Thanks.
everybody in our next episode. Thanks.
Thanks.